Is Tejas the most overlooked album in ZZ Top's entire catalog? That's the question we're going to answer today. Because when people talk about ZZ Top, they usually bring the hits. We got La Grange, we got this one, Fandango with Tush, or the one that people always know, the MTV Baby, that one, Eliminator. But this one is different. It came out at an important time in their career. So before we get into the details, let me say this. I've always had a strong connection with ZZ Top. At first I knew them from MTV, but I've been getting into them a lot. I mean, I really like the Texas blues groove, the attitude, and Billy Gibbons' guitar tone. It just really pulls me in. Whether it's the early blues records or the polished 80s sound. They always sound like themselves. And for me, discovering Tejas was like finding a missing link between those two worlds. So that's what I want to talk about. But before I even do that, I want to show you a little bit of this album because this is from the box set, and a lot of these albums are just like the simple sleeve, but this one actually opens up and has like a more elaborate package. So it's actually pretty cool. It's some really nice photography in the middle, and it shows the three band members, which is Dusty, Frank, and Billy here. You can see at this point in time, they don't have those long beards. Those long beards will come back later when they take a 3-year break and they release another album called Diguayo. I'll do a video on that later, but I just wanted to mention that first. Now let me get back into this album right here. So Tejas was released in November 1976. It was produced by Bill Ham and it runs about 34 minutes with 10 tracks. The title Tejas is the Spanish spelling for Texas, and it comes from a Caddo word meaning friends or allies. So even the title connects deeply to their home state. At this point in their career, ZZ Top were at a crossroads. They had already released major albums like Tres Hombres and Fandango, like I was showing you before. They were known for a Texas gritty blues rock, but Tejas feels different. It's leaner, more spaced out, it has more atmosphere. You still hear the blues, you still hear the boogie, but now there are hints of country, Tex-Mex, even early textures that would later explode on the Eliminator. The album feels like experimentation, not in a wild progressive rock way, but in tone, texture, and mood. Even though it didn't produce a massive hit single, it still peaked at number 17 on the Billboard 200 and eventually went gold. That tells you fans were still paying attention, even if radio wasn't. Another important moment was after the massive worldwide Texas tour supporting this album, the band took a 3-year break when they came back in 1979 with Diguayo. Tejas is literally the end of one era. Now, we have to talk about Billy Gibbons. He's often called the minister of tone. This album might be where his studio experimentation really started to grow. Early records were about raw power. On Tejas, it's about texture and space. The centerpiece, of course, is his 1959 Les Paul standard, Pearly Gates. On this album, his tone is thick and creamy, but slightly more controlled. He often rolled the tone knob back and used both pickups to create that smooth, singing, sustained, people sometimes call woman tone. He also moved away from using only big Marshall stacks. He used smaller Fender Tweed amps and Rio Grande amps, pushing them hard. Smaller amps driven to their limits often sound bigger on tape because they saturate evenly. You can hear that mid-range growl, especially on tracks like El Diablo, and I'll talk more about that song a little later. Here's one of the coolest details. He uses a shaved down Mexican peso coin as a pick. That metal hitting the strings gives you that sharp attack with those famous pinch harmonics. When you hear all little squeals and chirps at the beginning of notes, that's part of the magic. The engineering is also important. Frank Beard's drums sound very dry and tight. They're crisp, they're controlled. It has a tight drum sound that foreshadows the program feel that they would use in the 80s. And finally, the instrumental Asleep in the Desert uses subtle tape delay from an Echoplex, creating a heat mirage desert atmosphere. It's cinematic, almost psychedelic, and I'll talk more about that later again, but let's break down the album track by track. Opening track is It's Only Love. It's a straightforward blues rock track. It reminds me a little bit of the Steve Miller Band with a cleaner guitar tone. There's still grit, but it's more controlled. Frank Beard plays a lot of drum fills here. The second half of the song almost feels like a transition back to classic ZZ Top territory. And towards the end, there's a cool harmonica solo that adds some traditional blues flavor. It's a solid opener that shows both the old and new sides of the band. Arrested for Driving While Blind is a classic Texas boogie, galloping rhythm, blues swagger. Billy Gibbons and Dusty Hill trade vocal lines, which gives the song character and energy. The guitar work is excellent, lots of blues licks and signature Gibbons-style solos. This one feels like a direct link to earlier albums. If someone says they missed the old ZZ Top, this track delivers it. El Diablo slows things down. It's smooth and story-driven. The guitar tones are cleaner with reverb, giving it a slightly psychedelic and spacey feel. You can clearly hear the texture in Billy's playing. It's emotional, controlled. It's where the album's experimental mood really starts to show. It almost feels like you're driving alone at night in a desert. Snappy Khaki shifts gears. It's funky. You can hear influences from different bands, something like Grand Funk Railroad or Parliament Funkadelic. It has that groovy sound. Billy uses different effects. The guitar tone feels looser and more playful. It's not typical blues boogie. It's ZZ Top stretching out. Enjoy and Get It On brings back that classic ZZ Top energy. Frank Beard keeps a steady beat. Billy's vocals sound similar to the style he used on Tush. There's cool slide guitar work, and Dusty Hill's bass line during the solo really stands out. It feels very comfortable, familiar, and classic. $10 Man is more upbeat and aggressive. Billy's vocals are stronger and more forceful. Frank Beard brings high energy to the drums. The guitar tone is more intense, slightly angrier. It shows that even on an experimental album, they can still hit hard. Pan Am Highway Blues is another energetic track with a funky edge. The guitar tone here is bright and very clean. Billy's vocal performance feels uplifting. Frank Beard's drumming is tight and sharp. It blends classic ZZ Top groove with the cleaner, tighter production style of this album. Avalon Hideaway is a cool blues track where Dusty Hill really shines. Billy and Dusty share vocals again, and the bass playing is some of the best on the album. Billy uses a cleaner tone here instead of the heavier distortion. Feels relaxed but confident. She's a Heartbreaker brings back that Texas boogie, more distortion, classic blues structure. Very memorable chorus. You can hear a bit of country influence in the sound. It's the kind of track that reminds you exactly who ZZ Top are at their core. The album closes with Asleep in the Desert. It's the most different sounding track in the album. It's psychedelic, it's an instrumental, it has jazzy tones, atmospheric guitar work. Some of the phrasing brings to mind Carlos Santana in terms of expressing melodic lead playing. The Echoplex delay creates space and depth. It feels cinematic, feels like heat rising off desert sand, and ending the album with an instrumental like this was a bold move. Now here's something interesting. When Tejas first came out in 1976, critical response was mixed. Honestly, a lot of critics didn't seem to fully understand what the band was trying to do. At the time, professional reviews were not overly enthusiastic. Later, retrospective ratings tell the story pretty clearly. AllMusic would eventually give the album 4 stars, which shows that over time, critics began to appreciate what ZZ Top were doing here. But in Kreisgau's record guide, which came out in 1981, Robert Kreisgau gave it a C+. Not terrible, but far from glowing. It suggests that it's average or uneven. Rolling Stone didn't even formally rate it in its original review cycle, which says something about how the album landed in the larger rock conversation at the time. But in the Rolling Stone album guide, it was later received and they gave it a 2.5 stars. So if you think about it, like what happened, I think part of the issue is context. In 1976, rock was changing fast. Punk was about to explode. Arena rock was dominating. Progressive rock was at its peak. And here comes ZZ Top with a short, moody, slightly psychedelic Texas blues album that doesn't have an obvious hit single. It probably felt subtle, maybe even underwhelming to critics, expecting another La Grange or Tush. But what they may not have realized is that Tejas was not trying to be a hit machine. It was a texture record, a mood record, a transition record, and sometimes albums like that take time to be understood. Today, many hardcore fans see Tejas as a cult favorite precisely because of the atmosphere and experimentation. So in a way, the critics might not have fully got it at the time, but history has been very kinder. Let's go back to the question, is Tejas ZZ Top's most overlooked album? I would say so. I'd say yes. It doesn't have a massive radio hit. It doesn't get talked about like Tres Hombres. It doesn't have the flashy production of the 80s material like Eliminator or the ones that followed. But when you listen to it from start to finish, you hear a band experimenting with tone, space, and texture. You hear Billy Gibbons refining his studio sound. You hear tighter drum engineering. You hear hints of what would later define their 80s success. It's a transition album, but also a very solid album. Sometimes those transitional records are the most interesting one. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you check out my full review of Fandango. That's going to appear on the screen right now. The album captures a different, equally important moment in ZZ Top's career. It's a half-live album, and I go into all of that. If you like this video, hit the like button, leave a comment, and tell me what you think about Tejas. Is it underrated, a hidden gem, or do you think it deserves maybe a lower profile? Subscribe to the channel if you love rock and metal deep dives like this, and I will see you in the next review.